Upbringing, I'd say in my life is always one, from my father was always like, be a man. There was very little tolerance for kiddie type stuff. Things that are more family friendly today weren't friendly growing up. That doesn't mean I didn't have fun in my house or things like that, but my father was pretty much a reality person, and life was hard, and you need to be tough because people will hurt you if you don't know how to defend yourself. You need to defend yourself. So, he was a tough guy, straight shooter, man's man. My grandparents lived right above us in the apartment we lived in Hoyoke back in the early 70s. And I could see some of the things that were in my grandmother's closet, like his boxing robe, his coat, which would lead me to have questions for my father. I knew my father was a larger-than-life type character. I was kind of afraid of him, pretty much right up to the end, because I knew he was a tough guy. The boxing history was just all around. There were photos around, friends coming over. It intermingled with his political life and his life as a firefighter. It was all part of who he was. I think when boxing came to Hoyoke in the 50s, and I've talked with a lot of people about this type of thing and understanding who my father was because I lost him at such a young age, it was an epic program. It was just something that the city needed at that period of time. It needed something to get kids off the street. My father had just moved to Hoyoke, as I think he was like in his late teens, and they lived on South Summer Street in Hoyoke, which was, mostly Canadian French at the time. And he used to hang out on the streets. So Pat Bartlett used to go around scouting to build the program. And that's when he found my father and says, hey, why don't you do something with your life besides hanging around on the streets? Why don't you come to the club and get involved? See what we can do, see how you can help us out, how we can help you out. And that was a journey that he took. But boxing in the 50s in Hoyoke, if you think about life back then, there wasn't like, hey, let's go to the Showcase Cinemas, let's go to 99, everything was local. And so you needed local entertainment, and boxing was a very popular program back then, and the gentlemen that participated in it were local stars and held up in high regard. I've never saw my father fight. I was told the last time he fought was the night before he married my mother. And she did not want to be, she loved him being a boxer, and it was a lot of fun while they were going out and hanging out, whatever, but she knew that, you're going to build a family, you need to have a career. And he decided on becoming a firefighter. However, he still maintained strong involvement in the Hoyoke Boys Club organization and the Golden Gloves by being a judge, acting as a coach. So there were several times I'd go down to the Boys Club in Hoyoke and sit on the bleachers while he was coaching boxers. Sometimes he'd have me up in the ring and play. I was maybe 5, 6 years old. I don't really recall any of the boxers he coached because, that was more his life than mine. But I know the relationships that he had at the Boys Club and the mission that the Boys Club had is why he stayed attached to it. So he's very close to Nick Cosmos and Pat Bartlett, who are key figures in that boxing program in the early days. And I think he just loved the program and helping out youth, be a positive force in the community. I didn't know Pat very well, but I know he came over the house a lot with my father because my father was always involved in Boys Club activities. I got involved in the Boys Club after my father passed away. I wasn't a boxing judge, but I supported the program. I sponsored trophy in my father's weight class. Trying to think what else we did with Pat. He just talked a lot. He's the one that told me the story about how my father came into the program. He was just the perfect gentleman, really nice guy. But he was the recruiter. He was the guy that went out and identified the right kids to be in that program that wanted to do something with their lives and be involved. So that's all I heard, that I know about Pat. So my father would probably speak more affectionately about him. Nick Cosmos, kind of like the same thing. Nick was the guy that pulled it all together and kind of made it all happen. He was the guy that ran the institution and kind of headed up that program. So again, my father had a lot of respect for him. If you look at how I got tied into this, I was 18 years old when my father passed away. He owned a liquor establishment in the city. He was very good friends with the people who were in power and politically at that time, and the chief of police was his best buddy going back to those early days. So they came to me and just said, hey, we want to pull you in. You're part of your father's life. We want to feel his presence. So in politics, in business, in the Boys Club as well. So I integrated my experiences with Pat Bartlett and with Nick Cosmos and John. I can't remember John's last name. But the three of them were instrumental. No one said, hey, would you be considering to sponsor, you know, your father's trophy class for his weight category? Would you be willing to take out ads in the publication? Can you talk to some of your business associates and get them to take out ads to support the program? So it was more like the modern version of it, you know. I think, you know, got to offer kids something, and I just want to support the Boys Club. I mean, it's a great program. It's one of the original programs used to offer kids in the community a way. I would say I could tell you how much my father loved the program. In his liquor establishment that he had in Hoyoke, the only recognition of boxing he had in there was a life-size portrait hanging of Bobby Kershane in the side room where, you know, we had tables and chairs for events and things like that. That is how much he cared for him. Boxing made my father the man he was, gave him the strength to grow as a positive force in the community and tie him into that world, which would help him become successful as a businessman and as a politician. So I think without the Boys Club, without Nick Cosmos and Pat Bartlett's vision of how to get these kids off the street and involved in the program, I think he is an example of the success of that program at that time, to take someone and elevate them in the community. So I think, you know, that's why I love it. It's why I love the story. It's why I love my father's history. My mother made a scrapbook of his whole boxing career, even though she had mixed feelings about it. To see that there is like legendary. So I view my father as a legendary kind of person. Like where I went to school, I went to college, I ran his business, I did politics and whatever. My father was legendary. I mean, his whole life was an entrepreneurship. And really impressive character, and very strong in that community. I think as you journey through this documentary, his name will come up a lot. He never really described any to me. I think the one that shocked me, it was the most fun one, was I was working in the Hoyoke City Hall. I was about 18 years old. His friend, the mayor, had appointed me to a position, and a gentleman was running for state auditor at that time. His name was Joseph Danucci, who was also a boxer, come to find out, and the state rep introducing him to people in City Hall introduced him to me, and he goes, Don Roy. He goes, I know a Don Roy, but you're not him. You know, he says, you must be thinking about my dad. And he goes, yeah. He says, you know, he goes, I was the last one to fight him before he got married. And he says, he kind of joked with me. He says, you know, please knock me out so I don't have to get married. so that was the last story I really heard about him boxing. When he passed away in 1984, he was 46 years old. After the funeral, a lot of people gathered around and talked to there were news reporters there, and they wrote a nice article on him and joked a lot about, like, they used to call him Kid Candle. He used to, whenever he boxed against Bobby Kershane, who was a giant in the field of boxing in Western Mass, he would always knock my father out in one shot. So even though my father was really good at what he did in his category of boxing, there are just some people who were better. So Bobby was a dear friend of my father's, and so I've heard stories like that. But from what I've read in the news articles in the Journal, and talked with other people over the last 25 years, they said that he was a very capable boxer. He had a unique style of boxing that was kind of entertaining to folks back then, and he had a following. He was like a local star back in the day. My father was never afraid to take a shot. So the boxing story actually doesn't happen at the Valley Arena. It happens at the Tri-County Fair. So you picture a newly married couple, young couple, father's full of life, and he's, large and thinks he can take on the world. He's there with his brother-in-law, and they're walking around, and some guy keeps checking out my mother. And he finally got sick of it, and the guy was smoking a big stogie, and my father just clocked him and just smushed the stogie against his face, the way my uncle told it. It looked like a cartoon. And my father just looked at him and says, "You got a problem with your eyes? Let me fix it for you." Boom, and that was it. So I know 2 weeks before my father passed away, he knocked someone out because the guy gave him, I don't want to say politically correct, trouble about a situation that occurred in his establishment, and he knocked the guy out. So I think, my father's always a tough guy, and you can't take that tough guy out of the polished businessman, and, it's still there. It's, part of who he was. So most of his boxing that I've seen or heard about has been outside the ring. But yeah, I don't know what to say. I think I'm glad to be a part of that experience, even though I wasn't old enough to remember it. I'm proud to have been a part of it. And my father was so excited when I was born that he bought me a little Everlast robe and shorts, boxing shorts. That's how much he felt pride about that program. And I found a news article where it was my sister, who's 2 years older than me, she was born in '63. They announced the birth of her in the local paper, like everyone does. But it says, and it just mentioned, and Donald Roy was also a former Golden Gloves champion. And so you even see that there. They would have to contribute that to that story. So my father identified that even at that point in his life as being something he was proud of. And he had a tattoo. He had a tattoo in his arm with boxing gloves. It said 1959 on it. So I guess that's the year he first became a champ or something. I think it's the first year of the program. I think, or maybe not. Maybe it's a little earlier. But I know he's one of the first boxers in the program. Yep, it's cool stuff. It's really cool stuff. But yeah, that's kind of it. I wouldn't have what I have now if it wasn't for my father and mom.